right, listen up, bub. What is American Pie about?
I don't know. Do you know?
Yeah, of course I know.
What is it about?
Sounds like a case for detective. I'm a crooked cop.
Why is pig in quotes? What is it?
Dude, back off. This is my suspect. I mean my friend. My friend. Hello, friend. Hi. Sorry. She can be like a lot. Don't worry. I know you don't know anything about American Pie. Because no one does. Yeah, even the guy who wrote it is like really tight-lipped about it, but honestly, I do think I figured it out. And I condensed it all into a wonderful chart. Okay, I'm dropping character. I am Ducky Wucky, or at least that's my username, and I am here to unveil upon you the American Pie Iceberg. I didn't want to do a lyric by lyric analysis because that would get very boring, and reading song lyrics out loud sounds very silly. So I ranked all of the information from least insane to the most insane. And as you can see, there's a lot going on. Probably more religious things than you bargained for, but follow me. All right, before this intro gets too long, we are gonna jump right into the surface. As I go about my explanations, I will be flashing lyrics up on the screen so you know I'm not insane, as well as relevant historical images. Our first item, and the most important one to understand, is what the heck is the day the music died? Entire inciting incident of Don McLean writing the song in the first place. Now, this might seem like an abstract, nebulous concept, like, oh, like you fell off, but it's like, no. This was an extremely concrete historical event in which multiple literal deaths took place. This is a reference to a plane crash that occurred on February 3rd, 1959, that took the lives of Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens. Three of the most prominent artists in 50s music, and it is a tragedy for so many reasons, but I think the details are so heartbreaking because Buddy Holly was 22, Ritchie Valens was 17, the Big Bopper was 28, and the pilot was 21. This happened after their plane took off in a snowstorm, and they would fly a short distance before crashing into a field in Iowa. Random side note, random side tangent. You may be wondering, why are there so many famous musicians who I hear about dying in plane crashes? I have a theory. I don't think it's a big conspiracy. I genuinely just think that musicians tend to take airplanes more than the average person. So statistically, their chances of being in a plane crash are higher. I don't know. That's a random tangent. This plane crash took place during all three of these artists had a joint tour called the Winter Dance Party Tour. And while touring, they were in buses. And these buses were getting so cold that they were getting sick all the time, and travel by bus had become completely impossible. Not only that, but their pilot was only trained to fly in clear weather. Not only that, but there was a problem with the plane's indicator. And an indicator shows whether a plane is parallel to the earth or not. This was a completely different kind of indicator to what the pilot was used to, so it almost showed all of the information backwards. It was extremely confusing, especially for such a young pilot. Also, air traffic control failed to alert the pilot of two severe weather advisories. The plane took off at 1 a.m. It climbed up 5 miles before disappearing entirely into the snowstorm. Eventually, searches began for the plane, and it was found 8 hours later, under 4 inches of snow. The plane had broken apart, and debris was spread for hundreds of feet, and all 3 passengers had been thrown from the plane, and the pilot was found inside. All of them had been left in 18-degree weather, prone to the elements. It is grisly. And the other acts of the tour, such as Dion and the Belmonts, survived. But Some of them were only on that plane because of a coin toss. So I can't imagine the kind of survivor's guilt a lot of them went through. But either way, this terrible, terrible tragedy put an end to this idea of the squeaky clean, optimistic 50s. And interestingly, as the song goes along, we see that the ending years of the decade often have significant tragedies that bring kind of like a whole new flavor to the next. All right, we are really getting started here. So now we're going to be talking about the hidden references to Americana. And by hidden, I mean just most people don't get it, which is fine. Let's just be clear, American Pie is a song about Don McLean ranting, and one of the things he likes to rant about is the loss of music that is truly American in his eyes. And so he is referencing, especially because later came the British invasion. So he's like, oh, like where did all this good old American music go? You know, like Buddy Holly. Like that's another thing lost that he is talking about in the song. And in this song, we see a lot of nostalgia and love for old Americana. First, I would like to address the Chevy to the levee in the room, because I know that that's a very confusing lyric for a lot of people. Some people might just be like, he wanted a rhyme, and it's like, that is true, but this does have a deeper meaning. This is basically just him reminiscing, because of course, Chevrolets were an absolute staple of the 50s. It was like the car to have. And levees, I'll show a picture, used to be very popular places for kids to hang out. And so basically, this is Don McLean reflecting on sort of after all this stuff has happened, after the era of the 50s is bygone, he goes back to such a nostalgic place, such as this levee. And not only are his friends not there, not only is this not the place to hang out anymore, but this is paired with image of the levee itself literally being dry. And then, oh, I love the way that these lyrics rhyme with each other. It's just like really satisfying. I love like just sort of blink and you'll miss it sort of rhymes, like rhymes that are just like, yeah, like you don't even notice our rhymes because you're like, that's, yeah, that just makes sense, you know? Also, the term good old boy in this lyric is specifically a very Southern American thing, because good old boys is just sort of like a term for boys. Like if you know like the Dukes of Hazzard theme song, can we play that? Will I get copyrighted? If not, I can sing it. Just some good old boys, never mean to no harm. And whiskey and rye just is a very popular, seen as a very American drink. And basically what Don McLean is trying to do in these idealized sections, because there's a part where he's complaining and the part of being like, this is how things should be. And he's basically just naming the most American things he can think of. It's like if I was gonna be like, rock, flag, and eagle. Or be like, yeah, hot dog, baseball, patriotism, eagle, caw. Enough silliness, we're moving on to the next entry. I promise this is the boring tier. Things will get less boring from here on out, but just throughout the song, there are little lyrics that are clear references to singles from the 50s and 60s. This is another idealized section, if you couldn't tell. And in terms of Did You Write the Book of Love, that's a reference to a song called Guess What? The Book of Love by The Monotones, which, I'm sorry, think of a worse name challenge. Impossible. Another reference is this lyric, which is also really freaking layered, because not only can this be a reference to the Rolling Stones, not only can be a reference to, because Bob Dylan has a song called Like a Rolling Stone, this could be a reference to his motorcycle accident where he was out of commission for a long time and be like, he's growing moss. But first and foremost, because this is that section of the chart, I would like to say that this is a reference to the song Early in the Morning by Buddy Holly, which the lyric is, I'm gonna read it, well, you know, a rolling stone don't gather no moss. So that could also be a reference to maybe even Buddy Holly's legacy, you know, or just be like, that stone has stopped, you know, now that this era is over. Layers upon layers, sir. Layers upon layers. Don McLean, is he still alive? Don McLean, can we hang out? Can we be best friends? Can you guys send this to him? I don't know. He also references the Beatles song Helter Skelter, but oh my gosh. Let's hold off on that, because that is further down and much more disturbing, and I don't feel like going into it right now. Also, this lyric, this one right here, is a reference to a song by the Byrds called 8 Miles High. Also, by the way, I'm not crazy about how this could be applied to a plane. I don't like that. I don't like that. That's freaky. Sort of like a reference to a plane falling out of the sky. It's like, girl. I mean, narrative cohesion for sure, but like, oof. This could also be a reference to a loss of hope. There's also a reference to the song Jumpin' Jack Flash, but again, that is going to be so loaded later. Just you wait. Finally, on to tier 2. We are beginning first with the mention of Vietnam protests. This lyric is a weird one. This lyric, even people who break it down, even on Genius Lyrics, people are like, what? Who? Whomstative? What is going on here? However, I believe that this is a reference to police brutality during Vietnam protests. Maybe I'm overstepping, okay? But that's what I think. I believe that the marching band mentioned is a reference to either the military or cops. And this entire set of lyrics describes so much tragedy. And at the very end, Don McLean references a time that he believes everything went wrong. A specific inciting incident that he believes is responsible for the downfall of music and perhaps society. And guess what? It's the day the music died, dog, okay? Guys, this is a limited perspective, okay? I can't believe I inadvertently already talked about what the Chevy represents. Well, anyway, wasn't that fun? Chevys are neat. Here are some pictures. Wow. Towards the very end of the song, sort of after like an emotional climax, during sort of the winding down of the rest of the song, he references Janis Joplin very favorably, which is very interesting because he's not a big fan of this new movement of 60s music. Perhaps she reminds him of this bygone era, or perhaps he just doesn't want to speak ill of her because she died a year before this song came out. But either way, he referenced her very favorably, and this lyric, like, it gets me. It tugs my heartstrings. Okay. I promise it'll be less boring. Tier 3. Also, by the way, can you guys remember to listen to the entire song before watching this? Because this is the weeds, guys. Who the frick are the jester, the king, and the queen? What? This is where we get English major, why are the curtains blue territory. Out of gosh darn nowhere, in these lyrics, all of a sudden, we have this poetic image of a jester, a king, and a queen. Here you go. And my hypothesis here is that the jester represents Bob Dylan. Listen, if I'm gonna really make a stretch, I could say that this could potentially be a reference to All Along the Watchtower, where Bob Dylan's first lyrics in that song are, "There must be some way we're out of here," said the joker to the thief. Maybe, but maybe it's just like a jester as a symbol of a common man before royalty. I think that's what it is. And another thing, the actual evidence is that the next lyric says, "in a coat he borrowed from James Dean." And if you look at the cover of the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, he is wearing a jacket that looks exactly like one that James Dean wore. And in this lyric, he is singing before the king and the queen of rock and roll. And there are many options where that could be. The king, very clear, it's Elvis. Very clear it's Elvis. The queen, on the other hand, that could be Mama Cass. That could be Priscilla, his wife. There's options, okay? There's options, that's for sure. Even Janis Joplin, I don't know. That's a real stretch. That's totally not it. And he says, "in a voice that came from you and me," which shows that Bob Dylan was a fresh new voice because he was really representative of just people. He was an everyman. And I think that the reason that Don McLean says this is because he views Elvis as like a final bastion of the wholesome 50s, which is being overtaken by Bob Dylan, because now he's more hip than Elvis. He's more of a beatnik, he's more of a hipster, I wouldn't say hippie. We're not there yet, so he's more of a beatnik. And another thing is that Elvis is a big ballad singer, and that was really big in the 50s, but now ballads are like a bygone era, and now comes the time of music making a punchy statement, specifically Bob Dylan with songs like The Times They Are Changing. Also, talking about a thorny crown that Bob Dylan takes from Elvis can mean, number one, the scrutiny and the difficulty that comes with being famous. Also, guess what? It's a religious reference, who would have thought? And also, Elvis was very publicly a Christian, so I think that also makes sense. I think Bob Dylan, he made a Christian album. I don't know if he... I'm gonna look that up. Bob Dylan's religion is complicated, okay? He's also he made like a Western album. He made all this stuff. Like, Bob Dylan is such an enigma. I love him. I love him. As for the line about a courtroom, can I read from you directly from my script, please? This line about the courtroom is dumb and makes no sense. Follow up later, you coward, and it's misspelled. Oh my god. Okay, so that's done. Next, I've been waiting. What the frick does American Pie mean? I know we think of the movie. Unrelated. Following in the pattern of talking about the literal most American things ever, Don McLean is saying bye-bye to Miss American Pie, and I believe that this is a mashup of the terms Miss America, which we all know is a very popular pageant, and it's very American, I suppose, and also the phrase as American as apple pie. I think that the penultimate, aka second to last lyrics of every song just have every verse just have a special flavor to them, and I think that put together they tend to serve a similar purpose, and I think, yeah, I said that badly. I don't know about you guys, but these second to last lyrics are the one that specifically stick with me after my listening, and I believe that has to do with the fact that a lot of these penultimate lyrics have specific personal things. So basically it's addressing me or addressing you. It's addressing Don or it's addressing you. It's very personal and very beautiful. But something touched me deep inside the day the music died. But I knew I was out of luck the day the music died. And we sang dirges in the dark the day the music died. Do you recall what was revealed the day the music died? And I saw Satan laughing with delight. The music died. The day the music died. Oh. We caught the last train for the coast the day the music died. Each of these lyrics is essentially tying back to the day the music died in multiple different ways, solidifying that this is when morality went out the window, solidifying that this is when everything went wrong. And I believe that this has to do with Don McLean's own trauma with this. Speaking of Don McLean's trauma with this event, I believe that the whole reason why he finds this so pertinent to write about, as you can see in this lyric here, is that he was a paperboy, and he personally had to deliver newspapers detailing the day the music died, the deaths of these three most popular 50s artists to people. So he had to feel and bear the weight of almost taking away, in his eyes, taking away a nation's innocence. And in a way, I think he feels responsible for this. Next tier, next tier, next tier, next. Don, very unpopularly, sees Woodstock as a tragic event. This, much like how the day the music died, was in 1959, the very end of that decade. Woodstock took place in 1969, the very end of the 60s. And this was a gathering of young people who had just been through an extremely tumultuous decade. And while this younger generation, which are now our grandparents, our moms and dads, while they see this as a victory and as a much needed event within this decade, some older people, such as Don McLean at this time, where this was past his time, he saw this as a gathering of lost young people. Okay, now I'm going to give a little history on Woodstock. And fun fact, the Woodstock Museum in Bethel Woods is amazing, and I've been there, I think, 4 times. So now whenever I go, I'm like, yeah, it's a little boring now. But really wonderful. And there's a lot of cool interactive exhibits, and I would 10 out of 10 recommend it. So, Woodstock was held in a dairy farm in Bethel, New York. There were 32 acts and 460,000 people there. And this was considered a defining moment for baby boomers and also the silent generation. And it was a truly remarkable event, no matter your opinion on it. You may not know this, but Woodstock did not go as planned whatsoever because thousands more people came than expected. The concert initially, cost money, but then people knocked down the fences, so just almost everyone got in for free. I would hate to be the sucker who paid to go to Woodstock. This was a country town, so the very narrow streets and highways in Bethel were completely blocked up with traffic. And at a certain point, people just started parking on the streets. People just started parking, left their cars, and they were just completely blocked. Due to the large amount of people, there were food shortages and also shortages of other supplies. And there was heavy rain. Performers were airlifted to the stage, and the county declared a state of emergency. There were 3 people who died, which is far too many. There were 2 drug overdoses and 1 person who was in a sleeping bag and got run over by a tractor. And there were also 2 births, so that's good. Imagine being a Woodstock baby. Wouldn't that be neat? However, what is not talked about is that there were several miscarriages at Woodstock and 742 drug overdoses. The most notable artists were Jimi Hendrix, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Janis Joplin, Sly and the Family Stone. I love Sly and the Family Stone. The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Sha Na Na of all people. The intentions were amazing, and the event itself was super duper cool. And it was especially a beautiful moment for music. But what Don McLean is getting at, or what some other people think, is that this was sort of a distraction from the tragic state of the country. And many of the ideological issues Don McLean has with the 60s are on display here. Also, this lyric talks about being lost in space. Moon landing was also in 1969, so this could be a reference to space travel being used almost like escapism. Also, there was a space race, This is kind of like the complaining tier. This is kind of the complaining tier. And here we get to the part where Don complains about the Beatles. Woo! This lyric here is so gosh darn poetic. Just the idea of them practicing or basically preparing to come to America and explode. Them practicing in the dark is so beautiful because, as you know, if you watch my Beatles facts videos, the Beatles were in Hamburg for years before they came to America, where they were refining their style, basically. And this was a time when they were kind of incubating, before they would change everything. And if we know Don McLean, we know he doesn't like change. This could also be a reference to their early days in the Cavern Club. I don't know how much research Don McLean has done on the Beatles or any of this. I think he was just going on vibes alone. Also, we have Lennon read a book on Marx. Someone's clever. Someone's read a book. All right. This is a reference to how John Lennon got really, really, really into sort of socialist, communist, existentialist, definitely atheistic ideas. Bro, John Lennon was a Reddit atheist, and I think he would be insufferable to debate with. Also, he brings up Helter Skelter immediately after mentioning the Beatles, so that's kind of loaded too, because that's Helter Skelter is a song by the Beatles, and then later that came to influence Charles Manson. We're gonna ignore it for now. There's also this lyric about people wanting to dance and never getting a chance, and I also think that another layer to this could be referencing the Beatles and referencing as how time went on in the 60s, music became less danceable. I think that's another thing that he misses because Don McLean mentions dancing a couple times in the song. I think that he's basically saying that eventually the Beatles music, got so experimental that it was no longer dance oriented and it was no longer dance friendly. And he's not crazy about that. Guys, Don McLean is not like the other boys, according to himself. I love this guy. He's a character and a half. Well, first of all, he's going to a dry levee. He is sort of living in the past. He is looking at all these places. He's going to Levy. He's going to all these places. He's seeking out these past experiences and realizing that no one is there anymore. And realizing that he has been left behind. And this song is almost a petition to be like, hey, let's bring this back. Is the strongest advocate for this. He wrote the song with a real rhetorical purpose. Now, this whole verse is extremely enigmatic because it's very personal and, in my opinion, extremely metaphorical. This seems to illustrate, in my opinion, the metaphorical image of someone slow dancing with Don McLean before eventually kicking off her shoes and basically running to the dance floor to dance with a rowdy young man. You know, I know you're in love with him because I saw you dancing in the gym. You both kicked off your shoes. Man, I love that rhythm and blues. So basically, I think that this is a metaphor for kind of just like his entire generation. Like, it's like they all used to sort of be in the same boat, like loving 50s music, loving to slow dance, loving this classy, you know, stuff. And then one day it seems like his whole generation has become enamored with this new rhythm and blues music. And he feels left behind and he feels rejected, as though his prom date is running out on him. And just generally, he feels abandoned by his generation who has gone to dance and be crazy and be rebellious, and that's just not what he wants to do. This is another reference to a single, but I wanted to put it in here because this is a direct extension of the last verse. So this talks about him with a truck and a pink carnation. Get this, guys. So this is a reference to a 1955 single called, guess what, Pink Carnation. The song itself is about a man being blown off by his prom date, which is exactly what Don McLean is explaining before. So I believe that's literally exactly what he was saying. He knows he's out of fashion now. That's why he felt out of luck the day the music died. Which, you know, there are worse problems, but like, oh, I feel for him, you know? Okay, now we are getting into Helter Skelter. A lot of you may have heard of Charles Manson, who first and foremost is a killer, and second of all, is a Nazi. A lot of people think he's just crazy, and he only did this because he's crazy. And he only did this because he misinterpreted a Beatles song. No, he was a Nazi. He totally knew what he was doing. I think he acted crazy to like distract people from the fact that he was trying to frame the Black Panthers for the murders that he did. And yeah, it was murder by proxy, but like, oh well, it's murder, bro. Like, shut up. Charles Manson is a stupid loser. That's mean. Charles Manson is a evil racist. Friends with one of the members of the Beach Boys for a long time until they cut him off because his vibes were rancid. Good call. But like, because Charles Manson was a musician first. So Helter Skelter is a reference to the Beatles song of the same name, which, listen, the song goes hard. And I listened to it before I knew any of this. But it's also the title of Charles Manson's manifesto, which was inspired somehow by the Beatles' White Album, which he thought was alluding to a future race war. And in order to, well, they believed that they needed to instigate this race war. They believed that once it was over, they would rule the world. And his followers murdered Sharon Tate, a very popular, very famous, very talented actress of the time. And several of her friends, how about let's pop up names because they also deserve recognition. And Charles Manson tried to frame the Black Panthers for these murders. This was another event that basically said rock and roll is not fun and games anymore. This also shattered a feeling of safety and idealism. And not only that, but this was a man who emerged from the music scene. So that was not a good look for them. All right, moving on. We have Bob Dylan's famous and tragic motorcycle accident. Not only throughout this decade, Bob Dylan was also outshined by specific artists, and he was also, in a sense, dethroned as well. In 1966, he was in a severe motorcycle accident, which is referred in these lyrics, describing him as in a cast, basically out of commission, on the sidelines. By the way, there's like a bunch of football references, so that's sort of the whole thing. The football references are dumb. I'll explain those in a second. Was also used to give Bob Dylan some freaking space from being so famous. Was pretty much isolated and not really heard from until he returned, playing an electric guitar, which was like, what? Everyone was like, that was an end of an era. All right, now we're going to be talking about the overt, I must say, Christian themes in this song. And in this bridge, which is the moment of complete despair in this song. Complete despair. And in the next verse, we're going to get a little more hope and a weird prophecy, but we're going to get to that later. But here, in talking about the despair of the late 60s, Don McLean has this lyric that the church bells were all broken, which is reflective of young people in the 60s with the exclusion of the Jesus Revolution and other charismatic revivals happening, as well as what were Catholics up to? I don't know. I hope something good, you know, as a cat myself. And this was just indicative of the mainstream becoming less religious and the embrace of Eastern religion and thought, especially when it comes to the Beatles. Because here we're talking about the specific neglect of Christianity. That's what he's talking about. So there's this lyric that references the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And people take it as a metaphor. What? People take it as a metaphor. They're like, oh, it means JFK, RFK, and MLK. And I'm like, I'm sorry. He's just Catholic, guys. And he's just saying that basically the music industry kicked out Christianity. They kicked out the Holy Trinity with the rise of drugs, free sex, free love, and the hippie movement. Christianity was largely being abandoned. People were quite literally kicking the Holy Trinity out of their lives. And Don McLean, once again, what do you think he's blaming this on? The day the music died, bro. It's not all about that, bro. Come on. Also, when Don McLean talks about God in this song, he uses capital G. And as Christians, that's what we do. Like, come on, man. 1969 as a turning point. This, much like the verse about the day the music died, is a slow and depressing freaking verse. Oh my gosh. It's crazy. So much like the image of the dried up levee. Later in the song, Don McLean details, here you go, we're gonna have lyrics and stuff, going to a record store and being like, I'm sorry, where's the stuff I like? Stuff I like isn't here. And it's like, what if it's not selling, Buster? It's not gonna be there. He says the music there wouldn't play. So it's basically, it's delegated to the back of record bins. And you hardly hear these songs on the radio anymore. And this is a moment of true despair because it's like, it's 10 years later. It's 10 years after the day the music died. And, or even when he made this, it was like 12. And so my dude's really like, oh shoot, there's no hope. He references the tragic end of the 60s, where he details children screaming, which is most likely a reference to the Kent State Massacre, which happened in 1970 during a campus protest against the Vietnam War, and the increasing severity of violence across the nation, especially towards protests against the Vietnam War and civil rights protests. Police brutality was crazy, and it still is, and singing and art took a bit of a backseat. Finally, we're getting to Altamont Speedway. Okay, so our first entry in this bottom tier is just a recap of the event itself. So like, do we like remember like TanaCon in like 2015, 2016? So basically this is 1960s TanaCon because we had Woodstock. Woodstock was a huge success. Guess who didn't play there? The Rolling Stones, because of, I think, a scheduling conflict. And also they were probably like, whatever, you know, We go to music festivals all the time, you know, big whoop. But then it turns out to be like the most significant music concert in like the history of the world. And so they're like, oh shoot, we should do our own thing and we should be the headliners and have some other people. The Altamont Speedway free concert. Do you seriously, like the TanaCon like parallels are crazy because she made it free. They made it free. Woodstock was not originally free, but it ended up being free because they tore down the walls. But Altamont, they're like, yeah, bro, it's free. Come on in, you know. You're a featured creator. I have to stop. This is terrible. So it happened on December 6th, 1969, which was a couple months after Woodstock. This concert was notably free and a much more sort of, in their eyes, countercultural concert. And people attended it to basically be like West Coast version of Woodstock. So just like a little bit grittier, a little bit crazier. 300,000 people attended. Uh-oh, what could go wrong? There were overlapping acts from Woodstock such as Jefferson Airplane, Santana, The Grateful Dead. And by the way, those guys were all supposed to play. Supposed. So guess what? They didn't. Because of poor planning, what a freaking mess everything was, and the tragic outcome. I'm sure they're so grateful they didn't go. So, people who actually did play were Crosby, Stills, and Nash, the Rolling Stones, and my loves, the Flying Burrito Brothers. They're great. The concert was really chaotic from the start because guess who the security was? The Hells Angels biker gang. Guess what? They did a horrific job. Oh my gosh. There were so many injuries. And overlooked aspect, so many car crashes because Hells Angels don't know how to freaking direct traffic. Like, that's not their job. Lots of stolen cars, 3 accidental deaths, and 1 murder. During the Rolling Stones' performance of Sympathy for the Devil, a fight broke out in the crowd. The performance stopped so security could get things under control. And then the concert resumed. While they were playing the song Under My Thumb, an 18-year-old boy attempted to get on stage and subsequently got into a skirmish with a Hells Angel. He then proceeded to tear away from the Hells Angel, pull a gun on Mick Jagger, and he was then stabbed to death. All this happened while the band was playing, and they seem not to be aware of it. The man who was killed was found to be high on meth at the time. The Rolling Stones were really scrutinized for their lack of action. However, they said that they didn't stop playing because they were worried that the audience would riot if they stopped. Great audience you got there. Now, for the next entry, we see these religious themes. And the story of Altamont being, you know, the themes are theming, they're hugging, they're kissing. The themes are together now. So he is equating, especially because the Rolling Stones have a song called Sympathy for the Devil. Also, by the way, the lyric Jack Flash sat on a candlestick. Gross. So Don, my darling Donnie boy, really leans into the religious stuff here. He discusses Jack Flash and a candlestick. So this is basically, you know, your regular bastardization of a nursery rhyme, because this Rolling Stones have a song called Jumpin' Jack Flash. You know, so that's how you say Mick Jagger without saying Mick Jagger, basically. And through the eyes of Don McLean, an extremely religious man, he sees this event as something demonic and almost like I don't think he actually thinks that, but almost metaphorically like a human sacrifice, like a satanic ritual. And I think what he's trying to get at is that corruption and hate that is introduced into our music, that we invite into our music, and letting hate rule in our hearts, like these Hells Angels did, only hurts us. And Don McLean describes himself as thinking about Mick Jagger on that stage and balling up his fists in rage. He's upset that they arranged this concert. He's upset that they didn't listen or stop while this was happening. He's upset that they're cultivating this kind of environment to begin with and thinks that this would not happen in the 50s. He is upset that this is the antithesis to Buddy Holly. This is the antithesis of what he loves about 50s music. Wholesome Christian values made way for Sympathy for the Devil. A very disturbing sight, I'm sure, for a man as religious as him. He discusses the Hells Angels and how they couldn't break Satan's spell. I think this is kind of him being like, how could an organization like the Hells Angels at all improve such a messed up concert situation? Basically being like, you can't fight fire with fire, being like, we need goodness to fight evil. It's our last entry, gang. This has been really fun. I hope you guys are really liking the video. I know that this is a little informal. I know it gets a little sloppy. I know that I'm not reading my entire script, but you know, sometimes you just got to get it done. And that's what I'm doing. I want to get it done so I can get it out and give it to you guys, because I have been promising this video for like way too long to not do it. You know what I mean? Okay. All right. So in this, here it is. Entire missing verse. Or not missing, he just took it out. But either way, it's, you know, you really gotta know about it, you know? But it is on Genius Lyrics. That's awesome. So in this verse, Don details praying to God and saying that he would do anything to make the music come back, aka that 50s music, because I think he really thinks it would fix everything. You know, maybe that's just the theme of the song. Maybe he doesn't actually think that that would solve things, but like, sir, he says that God promises that this music will return, but that it would come in a different way. He says 1 will equal 4. What? Which I believe is a reference to the 4 Beatles taking the place of the singular Elvis. Listen, I know Don McLean is salty about the Beatles, but follow me. But I believe this is partially because, first of all, the Beatles were inspired by Buddy Holly. That's where they got their name, because with Buddy Holly, his band is called the Crickets. And the Beatles were inspired because they're like, we want a bug name too. And then he says that 4 would come to mourn. Which, you know, to a regular person would be like, oh, you know, John Lennon died. Or it could be a reference to their manager dying. That's also a thing. But also, I don't know how invested Don McLean is in Beatles lore. I don't know. This could be a reference to John Lennon dying. But here's the thing. John Lennon didn't die yet when this song came out. So either it cannot possibly be about that, or Don McLean killed John Lennon. I know. I'm kidding. This is in the form of a prophecy. He says when this happens, the music will be reborn. So that's that. I wonder why he cut it. Maybe because he'd be put on a list. So that's what American Pie was about. If you ask anyone, they'll probably struggle to tell you what it means. So now you can just totally rub it in their face and be like, I know. And if you need anything to rapidly tell someone exactly what American Pie is about, I have a TLDR. It is a retrospective of the 60s written at the end of the decade by a conservative Christian man who saw this not as a revelatory generation, but a generation deeply lost in drugs, sin, sex, and most importantly, the wrong dang music. He yearns for a childhood he cannot return to because everyone around him has moved on, and the pioneers of those early days of music were all tragically killed on the same day. And McLean doesn't want to let them fade away so quickly. He wrote this song partially to reignite interest in Buddy Holly in particular, and he succeeded. It's a fascinating song because it's a perspective of the 60s we rarely often hear. He's talking about kids these days. But the kids these days are baby boomers. I hope the song has made you think. I hope you can see all the parallels of the song to our world today. And I hope you've learned just a little bit more about music history. I've been Detective Ducky, and I'll see you in the next one.